You would never speak to someone you love the way you speak to yourself. You know this. You have known it for a long time. And yet the voice continues. The one that arrives before you have finished making a mistake. The one that reviews the day and finds what fell short before it finds what held. The one that withholds the warmth you freely give to others from the one person who needs it most. That voice is not wisdom. It is not the discernment of a soul committed to genuine growth. It is a wound that learned to speak in the tone of a teacher. And what arrives in this transmission is the precise frequency that dissolves it. Not through more effort, not through more discipline, but through the specific quality of inner warmth that the seventh ray of Saint Germain has been carrying for your field since before you were born into this lifetime. Stay with every word of what follows. I am Saint Germain, keeper of the violet flame, Chohan of the seventh ray of freedom, transmutation, and divine alchemy. I come to you today not as a figure of historical mysticism, not as a character to be believed or disbelieved, but as a living transmission of the precise frequency that your inner world is already responding to as you receive these words. You felt something shift in the last few days, even if you could not name it, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a tenderness in the chest that arrived without an obvious cause, a quiet sense that something is loosening inside you that was locked down for a very long time. What you are feeling is not random, and it is not personal pathology. What you are feeling is the seventh ray doing its ancient work inside the specific configuration of your present human life. The seventh ray is not a metaphor. It is a living force, as real and as measurable in its effects as fire is real in the physical world, and it operates through the same fundamental principle. It transforms matter into a higher state by burning away what is no longer needed while leaving intact what is essential and true. The matter it works upon in your current lifetime is the accumulated sediment of a very specific human wound. The wound that says love is a reward earned through performance, rather than a reality you inhabit by nature of what you are. And everything in this transmission is designed to work upon that precise layer of false learning and alchemize it through the consistent application of conscious inner warmth into the lived experience of your own unconditional belonging to yourself. That process begins now. Stay with every word of what follows, because the soul that found this transmission already knew what it contained before the mind had finished reading the title. Across the long arc of your incarnations within the earth experience, you have been learning something that the unawakened mind has translated into a principle of survival that feels like wisdom, but which is, at its deepest level, a profound misunderstanding. You learn to relate to the human self, to the body, the emotions, the imperfections, the recurring patterns, the moments of failure and confusion and longing, as a project requiring constant correction, as a problem to be managed more skillfully, as a rough draft that needed to be polished before it could be considered worthy of genuine acceptance. And this learning arrived from sources that genuinely believed they were helping you. Parents who pushed because they feared your vulnerability in a demanding world. Teachers who corrected because they understood that preparation required honest assessment. Communities and traditions that held up standards of behavior because they understood that a soul needs a direction to grow toward. None of these sources were malicious. Most of them were doing the best they knew how with the understanding available to them. And yet, the cumulative effect of this education, received by a young being whose nervous system was not yet differentiated enough to separate the message from the source, was the installation of a specific internal architecture, an inner voice that speaks in the tone of a demanding overseer rather than a wise and warm companion, an inner critic that treats every stumble as evidence of fundamental inadequacy, a habitual pattern of withholding full self-acceptance until a sufficiently impressive list of achievements can justify it. And this architecture has costs. Not only the visible costs of obvious suffering, though those appear too, but the subtler costs, the permanent low-level exhaustion of living under self-imposed scrutiny. The way creativity contracts when it must pass through a filter of anticipated judgment before it is allowed to express. The way relationships struggle to reach genuine depth when the being at their center is not fully available to themselves, because a significant portion of their inner resources is perpetually occupied with the project of self-management. You are spending energy you need for your actual life on the maintenance of a surveillance system that is watching you from the inside. And what the seventh ray has come to offer is the specific alchemical mechanism that dissolves that system at its root. Not through more effort, not through spiritual achievement, but through a quality of inner attention so precise and so consistently applied that it rewrites the foundational instruction at the level where it was originally installed. But the part of this transmission that most of you have not yet received, the part that makes everything else land differently, is still ahead. Do not leave now. Saint Germain wants to address something directly before the first practice of this transmission is offered, because the mind will have a specific objection, and that objection, if it goes unaddressed, will prevent the practice from being received at the depth where it can actually work. The objection is this: ease cannot be power. If the transformation I have been working toward for years is genuinely possible through something simple, why has it not happened yet? What I am about to offer must be insufficient, because genuine evolution requires difficulty, struggle, and the rigorous application of will. That belief is the wound itself, speaking in the tone of spiritual discernment. Let me address it with full precision, because its correction is one of the most important things this transmission contains. The architecture you are dissolving was built through the repetition of a very simple but very consistent internal choice. The repeated choice, made in thousands of ordinary moments across years and lifetimes, to respond to your own stumbles with judgment rather than with warmth. It can only be dissolved through the repetition of an equally simple but equally consistent choice in the opposite direction. The ease of the practice is not the signature of its inadequacy. It is the precise signature of its power. What you are doing is not performing spiritual achievement. You are reversing an instruction that was installed through repetition by replacing it, through repetition, with a different instruction. Simple. Consistent. Done in ordinary moments. Not dramatic, not difficult. Unmistakably effective over time. What Saint Germain is about to offer is not a concept to understand, but a practice to begin. Today, in the next ordinary moment where the inner critic activates. This is the part of the transmission that moves from understanding into the lived body of daily life. Stay present. What follows is specific. The first principle of this alchemy is this: your human self, the one who is receiving these words right now, the one who has stumbled and recovered and stumbled again, the one who carries the weight of everything unfinished, the one who sometimes cannot locate its own worth beneath the noise of the day. That being deserves to be held by you the way the most loving guardian you can imagine would hold a child who is learning. Not with the sharp attention of correction, not with the conditional warmth that arrives after achievement, but with the steady, patient, undemanding presence of someone who has made a sacred decision that this being is worthy of love before they earn it, worthy of warmth before they demonstrate it, and worthy of full belonging before they have finished becoming whoever they are still in the process of becoming. The practice I offer for this first principle is specific and intentional, because seventh ray alchemy works best not through vague aspiration, but through precise, consistent, embodied choice. Each day, in any moment where you notice the inner critic has activated, I invite you to do something that will feel counterintuitive the first few times, and then, very quickly, will begin to feel like the most natural thing in the world. Instead of arguing with the criticism, instead of trying to override it with affirmations, Instead of collapsing under it or defending against it, you place one hand gently over the center of your chest and you speak a single sentence inwardly, as though you are speaking to the specific part of your inner world that is hurting in that moment. The sentence is simply this: I am here with you, and you are not alone in this. Not as a philosophical statement, as a lived promise of presence, your own presence, offered to yourself with the full weight of a decision that you are choosing to belong to yourself in this moment, rather than to the architecture of judgment that has been running on autopilot for most of your life. And as you do this, not once, not twice, but as a consistent daily practice, a steady reinvestment of warm attention into the inner world that has been surviving on approval it was never certain was permanent, something begins to shift in the underlying quality of your inner climate. The shifts will be subtle at first, a moment of unexpected self-forgiveness that happens before the inner critic has finished its sentence, a pause before a habitual self-critical thought where there was previously no pause, a small, quiet, unfamiliar sense of ease in the simple fact of being who you are in the particular moment you are in. These small shifts are not trivial. They are the first visible signs of the alchemy working at the level where it needs to work. Forgiveness, within the seventh ray teaching, is not a single dramatic act performed once toward a specific offense and then concluded. It is a daily sacrament, a living practice of cleansing the inner field of the accumulated residue of self-judgment, so that each day can begin from a genuinely fresh starting point, rather than from a foundation that still carries the weight of every previous stumble. The human nervous system has a specific vulnerability that Saint Germain names temporal blurring. The tendency to allow the emotional residue of past experiences to bleed forward into present moments, coloring them with a significance they do not actually possess in themselves. When you have not consciously cleared the judgment from yesterday, you bring it into today, and the criticism of today adds to the accumulated weight of yesterday, and the day before, and the week before, until the inner world is operating under a burden so heavy that even moments of genuine beauty cannot land with their full impact, because the system receiving them is too loaded to remain fully open. The violet flame specifically addresses this pattern through a simple nightly ritual. Before you sleep, gather the events of your day as though you are gathering something precious and imperfect into your hands. Notice what felt aligned and beautiful. Notice what felt clumsy or unfinished. Notice where you fell short of your own standard and where you surprised yourself with your own capacity. And then, instead of filing any of this under evidence to be used in tomorrow's assessment of your worth, you offer it all. The beautiful parts and the messy parts and the fallen short parts. Into the violet flame at the center of your heart with the same quality of warm acceptance, you would offer the day's events of someone you love completely and without condition. You complete your day not with a verdict, but with a blessing. Not with a report card, but with a gentle hand on your own shoulder and the quiet inner acknowledgement that you showed up as a human being, learning to love in a complex world. And that this showing up, in all of its imperfection, was enough. If you have stayed with this transmission until now, you have already received the two core practices of the seventh ray alchemy. But what Saint Germain is about to transmit goes deeper than the practices. It addresses the belief system that has been making those practices feel dangerous to apply. The belief that is causing genuine damage to genuine seekers, and whose gentle but complete correction is one of the most important things this transmission contains. Stay with this. The second principle of this alchemy addresses a confusion that has been woven into the spiritual cultures of your world for long enough that it has come to feel like wisdom, when in fact it is a subtle distortion that has been preventing a significant number of sincere, committed, genuinely awakening human beings from completing the precise inner movement that would allow them to make the shift they have been working toward for years. The confusion is this: the belief that devotion to spiritual growth requires a form of inner harshness, That the genuine seeker must maintain a critical vigilance toward their own patterns, must hold themselves to a standard that does not waver in the face of ordinary human difficulty, must be willing to be hard on themselves as evidence of the sincerity of their commitment. This belief has been so thoroughly normalized within certain streams of spiritual teaching that to question it feels almost like an endorsement of laziness, of complacency, of a softness that might allow the human nature its familiar indulgences at the expense of genuine evolution. And I wish to address this directly with the full authority of the seventh ray. Growth does not require inner harshness. Evolution does not require self-punishment. Mastery does not require the whip of self-criticism applied to every moment that falls short of the ideal. What mastery actually requires, what the most advanced initiates in the seventh ray tradition discovered through the direct laboratory of their own inner lives, is the steady, consistent, warm companionship of a being who has made a fundamental choice to remain present with themselves through the full spectrum of the human experience, including and especially the parts that the idealized version of themselves would prefer not to include in the story. Because it is in those parts, in the stumbles, in the recurring patterns, in the moments of confusion and contraction and genuine failure, that the most profound alchemical work happens. Not when you stand in judgment over those moments, but when you stand in loving presence with them and offer them the precise quality of warm, patient, non-abandoning attention that allows them, finally, to reveal what they have been trying to protect all along. Your inner voice is a field of living energy. What you feed it is what grows in the atmosphere of your daily life. Feed it the language of inadequacy and comparison, and it grows into an inner climate of chronic striving. A permanent background hum of not enough that exhausts the very energy system that should be generating the creativity and joy and open-hearted engagement with life that you are here to embody. Feed it the language of warm companionship and patient acknowledgement, and it grows into an inner climate of genuine ease. The ease of a being who is no longer spending the majority of their energetic resources on the maintenance of a critical internal surveillance system, and is therefore genuinely available to the depth of experience their soul came here to inhabit. What comes in the next minutes is the layer of this transmission that Saint Germain considers most quietly powerful, because it describes what happens to the world outside you when the inner world makes this shift. It's how the quality of warmth you develop toward yourself begins, inevitably and without effort, to change the quality of your presence with every human being you encounter. That is not a side effect. It is the primary mechanism through which the seventh ray serves the collective. Pay close attention to what follows. As the inner voice becomes a warm companion rather than a demanding critic, something in your perceptual field begins to change that you will notice first in its effects, before you fully understand its cause. The way you look at other human beings begins to shift, not through a decision you make with the mind, not through a conscious effort to practice compassion as a spiritual virtue, but through the simple and irresistible logic of a heart that has learned to soften its gaze inward, and therefore cannot help but soften its gaze outward. Because the eyes of the heart do not maintain a double standard for long. Once they have learned to look through the surface of your own imperfections and see the genuine learning that is happening beneath them, they naturally begin to apply that same deeper vision to the human beings in your immediate circle, and then to the ones beyond it, and then to the ones whose patterns most challenge you, because the heart has discovered the same truth in each direction. Beneath every surface expression, no matter how defended or difficult or apparently incomprehensible, there is a being doing the best they currently know how to do with the inner resources they currently have available. This is not naivety. This is not the spiritual bypass that refuses to acknowledge real harm. This is the mature seventh ray understanding that the soul of every human being is always larger than the current behavior through which it is expressing, and that relating to the soul rather than to the behavior. while still maintaining full clarity about what is and is not acceptable in your own field, is the most powerful form of compassionate engagement available to an awakening human in a world that is currently learning very rapidly and not always gracefully what genuine love actually requires in practice. The violet flame quality of compassion that Saint Germain teaches is specific and important to distinguish from its more common imitations, because those imitations are causing genuine harm to sincere people who have mistaken self-abandonment for spiritual virtue and emotional merging for genuine care. Genuine seventh-ray compassion does not require you to carry what others carry in order to demonstrate that you understand the weight of it. It does not require you to agree with choices you can clearly see are causing suffering in the name of maintaining relational warmth. It does not require you to remain present with dynamics that are genuinely depleting your field in the name of being spiritually mature enough to hold space for difficult people. What it requires, and this is the precise and important distinction, is that the love you hold in your heart for every being remain clean and genuine and warm, even when you are simultaneously, with full clarity and without apology, maintaining the limits that keep your own inner world a sanctuary of truth from which genuine love can pour rather than a depleted vessel that gives what it does not have. From a place of guilt or fear, these are not contradictory orientations. They are the two elements of the mature form of compassion that the seventh ray specifically cultivates: the open heart and the clear boundary, not in alternation and not in competition, but simultaneously as the unified expression of a being who has learned that love and truth are not separate virtues but two names for the same living quality. In the practical territory of your daily relationships, this mature compassion expresses itself as a very specific quality of presence, one that is easy to recognize when you have experienced it, and almost impossible to manufacture through technique when you have not yet built it from the inside out. It is the quality of being genuinely, fully, unhurriedly present with another human being's experience, without the invisible pressure of needing them to be different, to be better, to be further along, to confirm your choices through theirs, or to move at a pace that makes your own witnessing feel productive. When you hold that quality of presence, what the seventh-ray tradition calls the space of the alchemical vessel, you create something in the immediate field around any interaction that is genuinely rare, the experience of being met without an agenda. And this experience, which many human beings have encountered only sporadically in a lifetime, is one of the most reliably transformative things that can happen to a human heart. Because when a being discovers that they can be fully seen, not assessed, not managed, not corrected, not required to perform, something in the defended architecture of their inner world begins to loosen at its own pace, without coercion. Driven entirely by the simple and irresistible pull of genuine safety, making genuine openness feel genuinely possible for perhaps the first time. Your calm presence is the entire medicine. Your settled inner warmth is the transmission. Your quality of unhurried, non-judgmental attention is the violet flame in its most practical and most powerful form, moving through the medium of your humanity and touching another being's humanity with the precise frequency they need to remember that they too are worthy of belonging to themselves. Saint Germain wants to give you one specific and observable sign that the alchemy is working. A sign that is easy to miss because it is subtle, and easy to dismiss because the critical architecture will immediately try to minimize its significance. The sign is this: you will begin to notice a brief pause, a single beat of space between the moment something goes wrong and the moment the inner critic begins its familiar response. That pause will not feel like victory. It will not feel like transformation. It will feel like almost nothing, a tiny gap in a pattern that has been running for years without any gap at all. But that pause is everything. That pause is the alchemy made visible. It is the moment between stimulus and response in which a new choice becomes available. The choice to place one hand on the center of the chest, to speak the sentence, to respond to the stumble with presence rather than with judgment. When you notice that pause arriving, do not wait for it to grow larger before you acknowledge its existence, because the pause is the violet flame at work. And the violet flame, given consistent fuel through the daily practice of warm inner attention, grows, not dramatically, not in a single transformative moment, but steadily, reliably, and in the precise proportion of your consistency, until one day the pause is so long and so natural that the old voice has to work considerably harder than it used to just to be heard. The final piece of this transmission, the one that completes the full alchemical cycle that Saint Germain has been building across every word of what you have received today, arrives now. It is the piece that the mind most easily misses because it does not arrive with the urgency of the earlier layers. It arrives quietly, almost at the edge of the transmission, but it is the one that ties everything together into a living practice you can use in every single interaction for the rest of your life. Receive it fully. Discernment, genuine, clean, seventh-ray discernment, is love with direction. It is not the closing of the heart. It is not the hardening of the gaze. It is not the spiritual pride that wears the costume of clarity. It is the living quality of a heart that remains fully open and fully warm and fully present, while simultaneously being fully awake to the specific dynamics at play in any given moment, and fully committed to responding to those dynamics from its own inner truth, rather than from the conditioning, the fear, the habitual accommodation, or the old pattern of purchasing safety through the performance of agreeableness. When you speak from this quality, when truth arrives through your heart center first, shaped by the warmth that has become your inner climate, offered in a tone that keeps every being's dignity fully intact, including your own, something remarkable becomes possible in your interactions. Not the forced harmony of suppressed disagreement, not the brittle peace of avoided conflict, but the genuine spaciousness of two or more beings meeting each other in honesty, without the dishonesty that passes for politeness in a world that has confused conflict avoidance. With compassion. Your truth, spoken through the warm authority of the seventh ray, rather than through the sharpness of defended certainty, has a quality of landing that you will feel in the response it generates, in the subtle, unmistakable shift of a conversation that has moved from the surface to the real, from the performed to the genuine, from the anxious maintenance of appearances to the quiet relief of actual contact between two beings who have briefly allowed themselves to be actually present with each other. And this quality of real contact, generated by the courage to speak truth through warmth and to hear truth without collapsing, is what the seventh ray ultimately serves. Not abstract spiritual evolution measured in frequencies you cannot feel, but the lived, embodied, moment by moment miracle of human beings remembering their own dignity in each other's presence and choosing one ordinary encounter at a time to let love be practical rather than merely poetic. Before this transmission closes, Saint Germain wants to speak directly to the being who has been receiving all of this and is now asking themselves, but what do I actually do first? Where do I start? The answer is simpler than everything that preceded it, and it is the most important thing this entire message has been preparing you to hear. Stay. You start with the next moment the inner critic speaks. Not a ritual, not a meditation session, not a course of inner work carefully constructed and scheduled. The next moment, today, tonight, or in the first unguarded instant of tomorrow morning, when the old voice arrives before you have had the chance to choose, that is where the alchemy begins. One hand on the center of the chest, one sentence, spoken inwardly to the part that is hurting. I am here with you, and you are not alone in this. Not as performance, not as therapy, as a lived choice made once in one ordinary moment. To belong to yourself, rather than to the architecture that has been running in the absence of that belonging. for most of your life. And then tonight, before you sleep, gather what the day brought. All of it, the moments that worked and the moments that did not, and offer it into the warmth at the center of your heart without a verdict. Let the day complete itself in warmth rather than in assessment. And let tomorrow begin not from the accumulated residue of what fell short, but from the clean, quiet, genuinely fresh ground of a self that chose the night before. To end in blessing rather than in judgment. These two practices applied consistently will change the quality of your inner climate in ways that will become unmistakable within days. Not the dramatic transformation of a single breakthrough moment, the steady, cumulative, quietly extraordinary experience of a being who is choosing one ordinary moment at a time to treat themselves the way they have always deserved to be treated. The beings who are most deeply experiencing the pull toward this transmission right now. The ones for whom the voice of the inner critic has been the loudest. The ones who have been the most diligent seekers and the least generous receivers of their own kindness. Are not the ones for whom something is most wrong. They are the ones for whom the violet flame has been preparing the ground the longest. The depth of the old wound is the measure of the depth of the transformation that is available. And the depth of the transformation that is available to you now is greater than anything the critical architecture has been telling you is possible. The seventh ray has already begun its work in your field. You felt it arrive before you reached the end of this sentence. The only question now is whether you will choose to work with it consciously. The beings who have stayed with this transmission through its full length are the ones whose inner world was ready for this specific frequency. Not comfort, not reassurance, but the precise alchemical architecture that makes the shift from inner harshness to inner warmth not just comprehensible, but actually available in daily life. Leave the word flame in the comments below if the violet flame is already at work in a specific place within your inner world as you receive these words. Leave the word here if the sentence, "I am here with you, and you are not alone in this," landed as something you have been waiting to hear from yourself. Your words build the field that finds the next being who needs this transmission and does not yet know it exists. Saint Germain holds every soul who found this transmission today in the full warmth of the seventh ray. Not until you have become worthy of it. Not until you have demonstrated sufficient progress. Not until the inner critic has finally been satisfied that you have earned the right to rest. But now, in this moment, in exactly the configuration of your inner world as it currently exists, with all of its unfinished edges and recurring patterns and places, where the light you carry has not yet fully reached. Because that is how the violet flame works. It does not wait for you to be ready. It works in the material that is present, in the specific, actual, imperfect human being that you are right now, in this moment, with this history, carrying these wounds and these gifts in the particular combination that makes you irreplaceable in the field of consciousness that this planet is building toward its next expression of itself. The inner critic has been telling you a story about who you need to become before you can be worthy of genuine belonging. That story is false, not partially false. It's structurally, consequentially false in a way that is directly responsible for the exhaustion, the contraction, the dim background grief of a life lived at a fraction of its available depth, because the being at the center of it has been withholding from themselves the one thing that would. Allow all of it to open, the simple, warm, unconditional presence of their own acceptance. You do not need to earn your belonging to yourself. You already belong. You have always belonged. What changes now is not the fact of that belonging. What changes is your willingness to live as if you know it is true. And the two practices this transmission has given you, the sentence, spoken to the hurting part, the nightly cleansing of the day's residue, or the specific, daily, embodied means through which that knowing moves from concept into the lived experience of your own inner world. I am Saint Germain. I am the keeper of the sacred flame of freedom, and I hold every soul who found this transmission today in the full warmth of the seventh ray until the moment, which is closer than it has ever been before, when you no longer need to be held from the outside, because you have finally, fully, and completely learned to hold yourself. If what you received in this transmission has moved something real in you, if the violet flame is already at work in a specific place within your inner world as you receive these final words, then there is a transmission waiting for you that goes directly into the next layer of what this one opened. The layer that addresses how the inner shift you have begun changes the outer expression of your life, in the relationships, the creative work, and the specific purpose you came here to embody. It is the one that follows this. Click on it now. Because the part of you that recognized what was true in this transmission already knows that the next piece is there.